Okay, so if you're not on mute, if you could put yourselves on mute, that'd be marvellous, because we'll all get jealous from hearing the sounds of your breakfast. And I'm going to hand over to my co-host Zoe to introduce us and what we're doing today. You there, Zoe?
Breakfast Club. Today our session will be a panel which we're all very much looking forward to, and it will be focusing on communication with impact, which we've actually surveyed the Lean In Leeds group, and this is a really in-demand topic, so we're looking forward to sharing this with you.
Sorry, I'm trying to click forward.
It's okay. Is it really quiet? Can you hear me better now?
Oh, yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So for those of you who haven't joined the session before, we do have a code of conduct. So these are the 3 C's. So I'll just run through these now with you. Although the overarching topic doesn't seem particularly sensitive, in case there are any anecdotes or personal stories, we want to make sure that these are confidential to the session. We really do pride ourselves on the trust and the openness that we do have in these sessions. So we'd like you to maintain that as well. You may see in the top left corner that our Zoom sessions are recorded. So if you would like to remain anonymous, I think somebody mentioned in the chat earlier, there's an ellipsis button and you can change your name. And of course you can turn your video off if you don't want this to be shared, because we will be posting this on YouTube for people who sadly can't attend this session. Perfect. So our next message is that we do like to promote communication. Many of you have already started using the chat function, which is great. We do like everything to be quite interactive. As we mentioned, we will be having a panel, so you'll be able to pose your questions to the group. So simply just use the chat function, remain on mute where possible. We just don't want kind of overlaying conversations, and it'll help with the flow of the session as well. Perfect. And finally, we do like to ensure that everybody is committed. This in effect means connecting with each other, not only in the session, but also afterwards. So we have all of our different social media channels, where you can actually help support each other following on from the sessions. You can create your own circles, which if you need any help with that, I'd be more than happy to help. So you can message the leaninleads@gmail.com inbox and we can help support you with that. So you can really be committed to lean in and supporting each other, which would be wonderful. Perfect. And with that, I'll hand back to Claire to host the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. Zoe's got to dash now, guys. So thanks for coming and doing the intro, and we'll see you soon.
Not a problem. Thank you. I'll catch the recording later.
Yeah, cool. See you later. So good morning, everybody. So my name is not Lean In Leeds. It's Claire Ackers, and I'm on the Lean In Leeds steering committee, along with quite a few people who are here today. I think there's quite a few of you who haven't attended Breakfast Club before, so I'll just explain a little bit about it and where it's come from. So Lean In Leeds, as Zoe mentioned, has been going for... Oh, sorry, can people just put themselves on mute if you haven't, if that's all right? Thank you. Lean In Leeds has been running for quite a while now, but about 18 months ago, we did a survey of our members, and the idea of a breakfast club was something that was quite popular. So Zoe and I basically volunteered to set it up, and we've been running about a year and a half now, and we absolutely love running it because it's a bit of a different vibe than the evening events. It's It's a bit more intimate. We get to have really nice roundtable discussions, and it's just a really, really nice event. So we usually run it at Barclays Eagle Labs in town, and they provide us with lovely pastries. So I hope you all got your breakfast here this morning, so we can all share that together in a nice cup of coffee. So again, Zoe and I had another survey. Sorry if I'm pausing. I'm just trying to admit people to the session at the same time. Zoe and I sent out another survey to ask about what people wanted from the Breakfast Club, what kind of topics that you wanted us to cover. And one of the ones that was top of the list was communicating with impact. So we decided to run with that as an online event, but we decided to put a spin on it for where we're at the moment, and make it a virtual communication with impact. And the reason I've got a little picture of me there, that's in my shed quarters where I've been working for the past 3 months. Is because it's a topic that comes up in my coaching sessions as well. So I wrote an article on imposter syndrome, virtual communication and imposter syndrome. So that's where that picture's from. But I'm pleased to say that we have got a fantastic panel for you this morning. Some real experts who are really, really passionate about communication, and will be sharing their thoughts with you this morning. Just a couple of housekeeping bits. So whilst we've got you on mute, and if you could just check that, because I think there's a couple of people who we can hear some noise on. Please use the chat function to ask questions. You know, we want to have a really valuable discussion that's actually going to help you with your communication, having the impact that you want to have. So please use the chat function, ask some questions, and we'll have I'll have a good conversation. So, as Zoe mentioned, I'll just reiterate, we are recording this session. We've got a brand new YouTube channel. I don't know if you've seen it, but you can see all the events that we're running at the moment online on there. And hopefully, again, through accessibility, we'll be able to reach a wider audience through that. But, you know, no pressure. If you don't want to appear, just change your name on your Zoom screen. If you don't know how to do that, it's the ellipses in the top right-hand corner, and turn your video off, and we'll make sure that, you know, you're forever anonymous. Okay, let's get my face off the screen. So this is your panel for this morning. So I'm going to introduce the panelists, and they'll just tell you a little bit about themselves and their particular area of interest. So panelists, if you want to unmute yourselves and get ready to go. So I'll go around in order that you see on your screen there. So first of all, we have Georgia Halston, who is the founder of Halston Marketing. So Georgia, do you want to kick us off and tell us a bit about you, if that's okay?
Yeah, so founder of Halston Marketing, we're a B2B marketing agency in Leeds. We work predominantly in things like heavy industry, logistics, life sciences, and really high tech marketing. I'm also on the board of the IABC UK, International Association of Business Communicators. So I think that what I'm interested to talk about is the different facets of communication between both external and internal comms.
Perfect, thank you very much. And then Bhavisha Kukadia. So where are you? I can't see you on my screen, but Bhavisha is a arts, fundraising and development professional with a specialism for trusts and foundations for Opera North. So Bhavisha, if you want to introduce yourself, if that's okay.
Hello, I'm Bhavisha.
Hello.
Hi. So yes, my focus is on arts fundraising in particular, but really interested in how communications work across the charity sector, and the arts in particular, because often the arts are a cause that aren't as well supported as others. And especially at a time like this, I think it's really interesting to see how the arts and the charity sectors are kind of changing and blending some of their messaging, and how we're reaching audiences in a completely different way.
Perfect, thank you. And then next we have Eleanor Snare. They work as a bridging catalyst between art and business. Using art, they help entrepreneurs and teams develop and thrive through change in a way that honours the experience of each individual and needs of the organisation. Eleanor is also a tutor at Leeds Arts University. So Eleanor, could you tell us about yourself?
Sure. I've actually copied and pasted that introduction.
Sorry if I nicked it.
No, it's fine. It's great. So yeah, thank you for the introduction, Claire. So as Claire said, my role is to bring the world of art and the world of business, which have been considered quite separate, together, and in particular to use the tools and language of artistic processes to help business people, entrepreneurs, and also individuals, freelancers or self-employed people really thrive in times of change, whether that's internal personal change or external change like a pandemic. And communication is what that business and many aspects of my life and my teaching is built on. I come from a family that didn't communicate very well. I think a lot of people will resonate with that, a kind of very old school, don't talk about your feelings process. And I had to unlearn a lot of that to be able to do the things that I wanted to do in the world. So I really care about people using communication to help us form stronger connections so that we can make more change and essentially improve our society. I really do think it's as fundamental as that.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And then next we have Laura Silcock, who is a copywriter. She helps brands and organisations to perform better by communicating better. Laura, good morning.
Hello, hi, and I'm really pleased to be able to join this because I think, as Erica said in the chat, she's not been able to join before because of other commitments. So yeah, it's great. Zoom's working well in this instance for me. So yes, as you said, I help brands and organisations, even individual consultants, to perform better by communicating better. So I work with everybody from SMEs to household names, and as I said, even the individuals. I often start by developing a client's brand personality and voice, and this really helps them to communicate consistently in a way that's kind of more natural and authentic to them and distinctive. And then I generally move on to write copy that either sells, influences, or educates, or sometimes all three. And I volunteered for this because, like Eleanor said, I just think good communication is absolutely crucial for both commercial and personal success.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And then finally, we have Georgina Turton, who is Head of Continuous Improvement and Process Automation at Burberry. Hi, Georgina.
Hi, Claire. Hi. Well, I offered to contribute to this.
Sorry, can you just make sure you're on mute if you're not speaking, please? Thank you. Do you want to start off again then, Georgina?
Okay. So for me, I offered to contribute to this because communication is absolutely fundamental to everything I do. I've been working in change management and continuous improvement for about 20 years. And a lot of people think of it as process change or technology change. But actually, 80% of the time when we've looked at making improvements, not just in Burberry, but in other clients that I worked with, 80% of the time, the thing that needed to be improved was actually communication. And now with us moving to a different way of working, it's been a really exciting time to see people leveling up and all coming at this from a new angle with this virtual working. So it's something that I find really exciting.
Perfect, thank you so much. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen now so that I can actually see the chat function as well, which will be helpful. Perfect. Okay, so then let's crack on with the questions. Whoever wants to jump in first on this, really. So what is the greatest challenge for either for yourself or for your clients at the moment, would you say?
I'll go first.
In
terms of the charitable aspect of the arts, I think it's really critical now. I'm sure some of you would have seen theatres and the performing arts in particular are going to, of course, be hit really, really hard. You know, we're an opera company. It kind of goes without saying that the majority of our audiences are of a certain age, and we can't quite right now imagine how we'll be able to fill theatres again and even have our choruses and our orchestras sitting in a close distance to one another and being able to perform. So it's really going to be around changing fundamentally what we're able to do as a company, as Opera North, and I think that's going to be there across the arts. But as a fundraiser in particular, you know, once again, we've seen how amazing really great fundraising campaigns can be, and of course Major Tom's sort of garden walk for NHS charities, and there's been a lot of talk about giving to charity at the moment, at a time where we also hear a lot about how you know, difficult the economic situation is. And I think it's really interesting now to kind of map and see how charities communicate in order not to sort of burn out audiences and burn out the cause. So of course we're now operating in a crisis space, which is a space that we wouldn't like to be operating in, and was possibly always reserved for more traditional humanitarian charities, where the message would be, if we don't act now, you know, this is the consequence. And the arts have always looked at it from a perspective of, we can invest in the future, we can invest in our artists and our children, in society, and now we're having to pull into that crisis space, because of course we might not have an opera company, or we might not have a gallery space or a museum in a year's time. So in terms of that communication, I think it's going to be really, really interesting for us to see now if we're going to have a bit of fatigue, crisis fatigue.
Georgia, do you want to come in on that, about challenges?
Couldn't find the unmute. Yeah, so I think that what a lot of our clients and our network have found particularly difficult is, obviously, we're quite social beings, and people have just found it very difficult to not be in the same social circles, not seeing each other. And I think that people find it difficult, particularly me. I'm quite a tactile person as well. And even when I do see someone on a distance walk or whatever we do with the dog, I can't even go up and run up and hug my buddies. It's strange, and it's estranging. And it takes a toll. I don't tend to describe myself as being particularly well versed in sentiment, but even I have found that, like, the slightest sort of connection with someone has been quite touching recently, where maybe I wouldn't have appreciated someone being honest and open, or someone sharing something with me as much as I have recently.
Cool, thank you. Laura, what about you? What challenges are you seeing?
Sorry, here I am. I think the challenge for a lot of companies is that there's a lot of information to get across, and there's important messages to get across at a time when people are being overloaded with information. And I think it's about clarity, but saying it in a way that resonates with them, so that they can both understand it, respond to it, and feel good about it. I was quite interested to see at the start, when all the emails started coming through, you know, from supermarkets and so on, the difference in tone that different companies took, and how that had an effect both on whether I was even bothered to read it, because, you know, when you're getting so many, if it seems like a big wall of text, I can't even bother to wade through that, and B, how it made me feel about their brand. So I think Ocado was a great example, in that their whole system went haywire, the app stopped working, and this, that and the other, but the emails I was getting from them was just in a really lovely, natural, human tone of voice. And it just made me stick with them and think, well, they will get it sorted. And I think, as Georgia said, that the slightest bit of human connection, it kind of makes you feel good. So I'm sure I wasn't the only one who was blubbing a little bit at the first clap for carers when we all stood outside. And I think it's about that togetherness and about people feeling cared for that's really important.
Definitely. Laura, have you seen any real shockers? You know, you mentioned Ocado there as a good human voice. Have you seen it make you cringe?
I haven't actually, but I think I think one thing that people tend to do, and businesses tend to do, when there's bad news to communicate, it's often tempting and quite easy to slip into a very formal style of communication. And the impact of that can be quite dramatic, because it automatically creates a distance between you and the audience. It makes it harder to understand, and it can really sometimes trip you up. So I think one of the key things I would say is, if you've got something difficult to communicate, stay human, and think about the other person and what they want to hear and what they want to know.
Definitely, top tip there. There's the first one. Eleanor, what about you? What challenges have you seen?
I guess to build on Laura's point, really, to say that the thing I've seen is that clients are having to balance the vibe of the communication that they're sending. They may have previously thought that, okay, actually what we need is operational updates if people are working from home, or maybe we need to get them together to have a meeting. But now they're trying to be sort of friendly and operational, and like reinvigorate that kind of water cooler chat, which is very, very difficult to do in a virtual situation because it's so kind of forced. Then they've also got the emotional experience, as the other panelists have said, about being in the pandemic. And then on top of that, do they talk then about things like recent political events or recent activist events? So it's that people don't know what to say, when to say it, and what ends up happening is they say nothing. They either, as Laura said, they go very formal, which can feel very jarring, or they say nothing at all, which for someone who's maybe, as to George's point, working from home and not used to that and feeling maybe quite socially isolated, that's really, really kind of quite emotionally surprising. And top of that, a really big challenge, and I think Sarah Keithley has just popped that in the chat, is about Zoom fatigue. And just the fact that virtual communication is more tiring, but we're having to do more of it because everything takes longer. So the challenge is really that there's so many messages, to Laura's point, they're so diverse, and then if someone doesn't say anything, you don't know what's happening. And on top of that, the way that we're communicating is just knackering. So there's this kind of layers of just a difficulty. It's like wading through treacle, I think, for a lot of my clients at the moment, whether they're talking to customers directly or they're talking to people internally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Zoom fatigue absolutely is a thing. I don't know if anyone saw the article recently by Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn, about how he builds in buffering between his meetings rather than going from Zoom call to Zoom call. He has sort of half an hour in between just to kind of gather his thoughts and just get a bit of energy back, I suppose. Georgina, what about you? Where have you found challenges?
So actually, I've been really impressed with how my organization has stepped up to the mark. We reacted very quickly to this. And for an organization that's very much about the tactile, it's about, dare I say, very lovey, because we're in the fashion world, we actually have had very good leadership. And what I think has been really important and what's been great is that our leadership really has come out and is bringing that human side of communication. Where I see there a real challenge is twofold, that people think that because we're in a pandemic that people like to be communicated in a different way, but people don't. And there's been research done actually in the last couple of months that shows things like business messages, key business messages. People like to hear that from your exco level, from the top, rather than from their line manager or a functional head or a change manager, for instance. So it's important about understanding that those messages, just because we're in lockdown and we're all working from home, we still like to hear them from that same person at the top. And the other thing is that we like to hear personal messages from our line manager. So things that affect our day-to-day working must come from the line manager. Again, not from a functional head or a director or, again, a change manager. And I think where there has been a little bit, where I found the greatest challenge is getting a number of line managers who weren't very good at communicating before to step up to the mark and communicate now. Because for a number of them, whether particularly those that haven't been very well experienced in line managing, they've kind of gone in on themselves a little bit and keep reverting back up the chain and wanting someone more senior to take the step up. And I think that's been probably the biggest challenge that I've seen.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to read a couple of the comments. I think they're really, really interesting and definitely add to the discussion. So John says he's not in the office, but anecdotally, one contact said they were making life easier by switching some meetings back to old-fashioned phone calls, so just audio, just to kind of combat that Zoom fatigue. Elizabeth says, absolutely agree on the human side, can see how different leaders have handled it where I work, and those leading with the human side have a much more positive effect. And then Jessica Cam, I'm guessing that's a Zoom name. A lot of brands have really pulled on the human connection with their campaigns. Oh, here's a question for the panel. Do you think this message could eventually become tiresome as we begin the unlock? What do you think?
I can totally see where Jessica's coming from here, and I think it's about being what's authentically human for you. So it's not about suddenly turning into innocent drinks and being all chatty and bubbly if that's not your style. I think what I would mean about the human connection is about thinking about what other people want and putting yourself in their shoes. And just being natural and conversational, but in a way, like I said, that is real for you. And hopefully that wouldn't be tiresome.
Cool, thank you. Anyone else want to address that point? Georgia?
Yeah. Oh, you knew I was going to speak. I've got a
You
connection.
unmuted yourself.
Oh, I see. I thought it was just me and you connection, Claire.
I feel like a conductor, honestly. Is anyone else like facilitated one of these things? You have to look at that and then look at that. It's yeah, sorry, carry on.
Fine. I think one of the brands who absolutely smashed it and who I use as a great example is actually Burberry. No, not trying to blow your trumpet here, Georgina, but honestly, they were one of the first guys out of the gate to be like, right, we've retooled, we're putting all of our production lines into doing PPE, and they were like, it was like a week into lockdown, or even sooner than that, and then afterwards you got this wash of other companies who were doing the same PR around retooling. I mean, it's great that everyone was doing that, and one of my clients did it, and they created a load of PPE, and they were, you know, they completely did a bit of a pivot, and you know, remained resilient through that pivot. But for me, Burberry, I felt like they were like, what were you guys from, like the 1800s or something? You guys were established, and I feel like they were like, do you know what, we've been through this kind of thing before, we're British, we're resilient, we know exactly what to do, we've been through 2 world wars. What you do is you retool and you start giving stuff away to people who need it. We're just going to start giving people this stuff to the NHS. And I was like, holy shit, that's amazing. And then everyone started doing it, and I feel like you know, we did a big PR campaign with one of our clients, like I said, who was doing the same thing, and now they're still doing it, but we are reluctant, and they are reluctant to be like, oh, can we still keep on talking about this? People still need it and we're still doing it, but you know, should we still be in PR talking about this stuff? People are sick of hearing it. And I'm just like, maybe people are kind of sick of hearing it about, oh, we're so philanthropic and blah blah. Like the message has kind of become a little bit lost. So I reckon, you know, great, still keep doing that stuff, but maybe we should move on to how people can help each other, you know, pull themselves out of any sort of economic slump, maybe, as opposed to like the more like care worker philanthropic angle in terms of the PR.
Absolutely. I'm just going to jump in there if that's all right. So I completely agree, Georgia, because I think they can get that message fatigue, as the question is. And so we certainly have taken the policy at Burberry that we're still doing things. We're now doing masks, but it's not about sort of standing up and advertising it and things like that, because what we're really focused on is very much on our employees, and we've taken a fantastic turnaround to support the employees. And in fact, that's been a thread throughout everything. So we were all sent work from home before lockdown happened, as soon as Italy kind of kicked off, because there was the risk there. And I think what's been important is the message has always been very personal to us, and about how we are going to come through as an organization, and we talk about different parts of what we're doing. And I think it's important so that we don't get message fatigue, that we don't get hung up on the same message over and over again, and we move, but without losing the important things as well. They're not going away, but we are changing that message and just sort of keeping people interested, because people want to be engaged and want to be interested at the time.
Lavisha, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, the message fatigue issue, I think charities always kind of tread that line. You know, for us at Upper North, we have several fundraising campaigns a year. You know, we do have some of our sort of Arts Council funding, but we still have to raise 2.4 million a year, and there's a team of 6 of us doing that. So you can imagine how the sort of, you know, the decisions that we make about who we speak to and how we raise the funds that we need. And at the moment, we're in the middle of a huge capital campaign. And part of that capital campaign is, you know, rebuilding a new opera centre for Upper North and Leeds City Centre, and a restaurant and bar opera. And it's all going to be, well, actually, is this a time now that we talk about a building, or actually is this the time now where we go right back to basics, and we're talking about the school children that we have free music lessons for, you know, those 5 primary schools in South Leeds that actually we need to work with them. We don't know whether we're going to have contact with those children, how their music education, the rest of their education going to develop, and actually this has been a chance for us to be really transparent about what we do as an opera company, who we are as people. So in a sense, I think that sort of human side of it has been an advantage for us that perhaps we weren't thinking about or talking about in the past, and it's kind of opened it up and going, oh, actually, do you know what? Yes, we're just a group of people, and the operas are not by the by, but we've always led with a successful narrative, and actually the thing that matters the most, and that people are genuinely interested in, all of our patrons, our regular bookers, you know, they know that the opera season will start up again whenever it's safe to do so, but they're really concerned about those kids who aren't getting their music tuition, and they're really concerned about the fact that our orchestra you know, how are they going to get on, and what about the singers, and, you know, our place in training new opera styles for the future. And it's quite interesting now that we're able to perhaps still have that message of need, because we're a company like any other, but perhaps we've got other things to talk about now, and our audience are willing to listen to those other things that perhaps didn't have the airtime that they had before.
Interesting. So you're sort of evolving the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eleanor, did you have a point you wanted to make?
I was thinking about listening to other people's responses and thinking about that question of, is it going to be tiresome to talk about human connection? And I think that one point is, I think it would be tiresome to talk about it a lot if it's not happening. So a company who's maybe given it all this, but not actually making the changes in their organisation or showing how they're walking the walk, that might be quite tiresome for consumers. But also thinking about where the consumer is on how innovative they are. Mm-hmm. So Burberry is an innovative company. Their buyers, I would argue, are a range of people, but I probably think they'd like to see themselves as innovative in some way. Whereas you might have a company which is more about early adopters or late majority. And I think it's important to think about where your customer is in their journey of things like relating to COVID-19 or relating to Black Lives Matter. Because if they're not, you know, if they're early on in their journey, you need to be thinking about that and not think, oh, well, we don't need to talk about that anymore. Because actually they might only just be learning about it, and therefore it's your chance to step in and help educate or share knowledge with them or show them something. So I think there's something to be said for being at the pace of your customers, or maybe slightly ahead of them, about where they are on that journey in terms of how quickly they pick up on it. You know, there's people still saying, oh yeah, it's fine, we can just all go to the beach and hang out together and we're not going to spread a pandemic. So I don't agree with that. But in which case, a company that serves those people maybe is thinking about, okay, well, where are they on this journey of learning about this? What can we talk about? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think there's something in there around responsibility and listening to your customers and where they are on the journey, but also educating as well, you know, being kind of sensitive to where they are, but sort of seeing yourself as a responsibility. And I wonder if any of you have an opinion about the role of big companies like I know we keep using the example of Burberry versus really small companies or self-employed people. How do they gauge the tone?
I've got a very strong opinion about that, if that's all right.
Go for it.
I think if you are in a position where you have an influence, and every single one of us has an influence, you have a responsibility. Like, I'm an educator, that's part of what I do, you know, I teach. But whether you have 100 Instagram followers or 1 million customers, it doesn't matter. You have an opportunity to influence people for positive change. And I think the thing that holds us back is believing we can't make a difference, because we think, well, nobody will listen to us. But marketing strategies show that things like micro and nano influencers, people with under 5,000, under 1,000 Instagram followers, are becoming a key part of businesses' marketing strategies, because they have a genuine engagement with the people who are in their community. And especially within a business, if you're a line manager, people are looking up to you, you know, and you have an opportunity to influence them positively or negatively. So I think there is a huge responsibility on everyone to influence their circle. That's my personal opinion, and I think that if we can believe that we can do that, we would see a lot more rapid change. But the idea that we wait for a big company to do it before we as small companies do it, I don't think we should do that. We can just start. And then hopefully, you know, I think it's really interesting to have someone from Burberry on the call, because as I said, and as Georgia rightly pointed out, they are innovators. But my companies that I've worked for, or the organisation, the university, they're not. They're going to wait and wait and wait and wait. But I don't want to wait. So I think there's a real opportunity to just say, do you know what, fuck it, I'll do it anyway.
Well, that's a lesson we could all live by. So the chat box is filling up. So let's move on a little bit. So Sarah's asking, what's the best way to make an impact when communicating virtually, when it's easier for people to check out or get distracted? Does anybody follow the Holderness family on YouTube or Instagram? There's a brilliant skit they do about someone kind of checking the phone just out the view of the screen, or like eating crisps under the desk, or turning the screen off and doing whatever. So I guess that's possibly, Sarah, if you nod, as that kind of thing, what you, yeah, people kind of zoning out and you're not having that impact. Who wants to comment on that?
Hi, I'm happy to comment on that. So this is something that I feel really passionate about, because I've been doing virtual communication for nearly 20 years now, via conference calls and by video links. And of course, when I first started about 20 years ago, just after primary school, in those days you had to go to a separate location, you had to like go to a special hotel, have be all set up, and then the other people in Hong Kong had to go to a special hotel and be all set up. You know, it wasn't as easy as it is nowadays. So it was very formal and structured. So we all reverted to conference calls a lot. And conference calls actually were my real bugbear, because with conference calls, you know, evidence has shown about 65% of people on conference calls actually are doing other work, not just paying attention. 65% of people are checking emails. I mean, even when they did the statistics a couple of years ago on it, I get this, 47% of people were on the loo when they were on a conference call. Like, you know, come on, it's awful. So in actual fact, I loved when sort of Skype kicked off, and that was more accessible about 10 years ago, and we could use that, and the technology wasn't great, but at least we could get that and get people present. So the really important thing for communicating virtually is sort of, I would say, threefold, in that have the video camera on. I'm amazed at how many people will do a meeting. So we use Teams at work, for instance, a lot of organizations do, where you can take the camera off. And I get that, you know, if your internet connection, because my Wi-Fi is terrible because I live in the countryside. So if you take your video off, it improves it. But at the same time, it's a conference call. So you start doing your work, your email, bit of eBay shopping, you know, So be present. So have that video on and be present with what you're looking at. The other thing too is also you need to pause more. So I'm a terrible talker and I speak very quickly and I'm very sort of hands flying everywhere when I'm talking. So you have to pause more to see what other people's reactions are and look for the reactions and then pull them into what you're saying to see whether they agree with what you're saying and bring that sort of emotiveness to that meeting as well. And really, it is about talking to different people. So to keep people's attention, it's about saying things like, okay, you know, you're having these ideas, these conversations, but I'm sure, Laura, you find this when you're talking to people as well, that you know, you've got to keep them really focused on what you're saying. You know, and same with you, Eleanor, when you're talking to people, it's about finding out if they're responding. So by just doing that, I've got both Laura and Eleanor nodding at me and engaging. And that's how you make sure that people are present, because you're bringing them into the meeting.
Who else would like to add to this topic?
I'd like to add to that. I think what this is making a sort of flag is that actually we've all jumped into this this way of communicating, and without an accepted sort of strategy to do it. You know, we don't have accepted norm. What's the etiquette? And I think for a lot of people that probably haven't worked from home before or haven't communicate like this is part of their daily lives, their daily job. You know, what is the etiquette? We've kind of really ramped into a different way of communicating. You know, I suppose it's the same, you know, moving from letter writing, going through people's PAs to emailing them directly and LinkedIn, and those things kind of happen at a slightly more gradual pace. So maybe, you know, actually it's about our organisations or us ourselves, as Eleanor says, to really think about what we want those processes to be and how we're comfortable communicating online without having this fatigue or without showing too much of ourselves or our home lives, if that's not something that we want to do. Sometimes it's unavoidable. You probably noticed I was breastfeeding 10 minutes ago. But, you know, actually, is it about us setting those boundaries? And I think boundaries are really, really important, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Who'd like to talk about boundaries? Or even Zoom etiquette?
I could just talk a little about, especially when I'm working with students who are very, very used to spending lots and lots of time interacting in some way digitally. A significant number of them are not used to being on video because they're chatting like through Instagram Messenger or Facebook Messenger or whatever. And the boundaries for me as a tutor and for them, it's really difficult because it's suddenly, you know, we used to think that teachers just lived in the stationery cupboard. And actually, no, they're real people with like lives and partners and things. And setting those boundaries, I think, to Bhavisha's point, my rule has always been, if I'm bored, you're going to be bored. So I just set the meeting or I set the tutorial to the time where I have my attention span. It might be a little bit longer than for them because they're not used to it, but I do that. And I don't, you know, you say, these are my email hours, this is what it is. And you just recognize that. I have definitely just tried to recognize that there is a porosity of the boundary, but that I'm in control of that. So I think there's a bit of, a lot of people are saying that this new working from home is like an equalizer in some ways, because we're seeing, you know, our CEOs' kids and so-and-so's kids, but we're still in control of, as to Bhavisha's point, how much people see of us and the time that we want to spend and all those sorts of things. So in a way, it's a really good practice to say, actually, am I setting good boundaries for myself in the length of meeting that I'll attend, whether I'll attend a meeting, but you know, when I share my emails, when you're working from home, you can email at like 1 a.m. So in a way, I think it's about practicing that, and you're going to get it wrong. That's okay. But it's about practice, just an opportunity to practice. And definitely with students, they want things a lot of the time. And it might be that if you're a manager or you have people who in your team who are particularly nervous about certain things, that might be the same thing. And it's about you learning how to say no and learning to say, I'm not going to do that. That's an amazing opportunity.
But boundaries is an interesting one because it is an amazing opportunity and it does bring in people. And you know, you guys know I'm a big fan about how this has been a real equalizer, and that's slightly different. But just recently, so last week, I was in a leadership team meeting and there was discussion about how we continue to engage our employees until we go back into the office. So we're working on our plans for that. So we think it's really important that we have that. And so we've been doing quizzes, sort of Burberry back office service quizzes and things that have gone down really well. So they're saying, right, let's look at something different. So they said, oh, what about if we do through the keyhole for the different members of the leadership team? Well, I nearly gagged because I was thinking, no. And I thought, how am I going to say to them, no, I have one or two rooms that I work in and I'm happy to share. The rest of my house is my house. And remember, you know, it's when we're now working at home, and that doesn't mean home has become work. So I need to be very clear to them, there is a boundary there, that whilst I'm happy to share some of my personal life, not all of it. I certainly don't want to come to my bedroom and have to make my bed in time for 300 people to see what my bedroom looks like. So, you know, it is very clear about that boundary between home and work as well.
Just do me a show of hands. This is for everybody. Who has put thought into what their background is on Zoom? Georgia, why don't you tell us about yours?
I didn't think I was actually in my background, but I actually can see the back of my head just here. So it is like a bit of an inception thing. But for me, it was quite annoying because we've got an office in the house, and my partner was always saying, oh, I'm going to make it into a real office. And I was like, no, you're not. And then he actually did it. He bought a desk and stuff and made it into an office like 2 weeks before lockdown. And I was just like, damn it. Now I can't take it from him. So I've been relegated to the living room slash clothes horse room, and I don't want people seeing, you know, my underwear drying in the background, and I just thought it was best to, you know, being a marketer, to always have like a bit of branding in the background as well. And we've got a great office. It's really airy, huge windows, and it's just lovely, and you know, I kind of miss it, but so many people are fooled into thinking that I'm actually in the office until you sort of start moving around and you realise it's not real. And also that none of the team are actually doing any work.
My favourite bit is when you go to the back to open a cupboard, it's like the perspective goes, so you look really, really tall, yeah, like a giant, and they're like tiny minions.
Okay, let's move on then. So let's mine your collective expertise. What are your tips for communicating with impact? Laura, do you want to kick us off? Because I think you've got some interesting things to say around written communication. You know, we're not just talking Zoom here.
Yes, I've followed my tip number 2 and I've been prepared. So my 5 top tips for communicating well at any time, but I think especially now, are number 1 is I touched on this before, be thoughtful and empathetic. So put yourself in your audience's shoes. How do they feel? What do they want or need to know? And what will resonate with them? Number 2 is be well prepared. I think good communications always start with lots of planning. So do your thinking and your research first, and then plan what you're actually going to say before you start writing, or even before you start talking. Be clear. I think when we were talking about boundaries, it's all about clarity. And as I said before, in times of crisis and uncertainty, that's what people want. They want clarity. Everyone's trying to process lots of information, and it's harder to absorb those details when you're stressed. So get to the point, start with what's most important to that person, not necessarily to you, and be specific. And make it easy to digest, whether you're talking or it's written communication. Keep it brief, use everyday words and short sentences. Number 4 is be natural. So as I said before, if you've got something difficult to say, still use your voice. Don't go being really formal. Make it feel like you, or at least a real person. And number 5 is be honest. I think people always appreciate honesty and openness, and it helps to build trust in you and your brand. Even if you've got bad news to communicate, it's always best to be honest. Where possible, try and find a benefit, or at least frame things positively. So even if it's just to say, remember to wash your hands, rather than don't forget to wash your hands. So they're my 5 top tips.
Thank you. Who'd like to come in next?
I'll come in. Mine won't be nearly as organised as that though, Laura. It's just going to be more of a haze of various insight. So as you know, Claire, we are doing a bit of research. We're doing a white paper on crisis comms. And we've interviewed some of the biggest companies in the UK across various different industries. One of them that stuck out was a company that I've worked with for a while. We did some digitalisation of their internal comms for Europe, Middle East and Africa, and that's a company called PPG. They do coatings and chemicals, and they're an absolutely massive American company, and they've got a presence right over all of Europe, obviously Middle East and Africa. So what was really interesting with the interview that we did with their head of comms, who's in Manchester, is his team are out in Czech Republic and Brno. And what they had to deal with was different countries having different issues at different times. So they had to deal with Spain, then they had to deal with Italy, and now they're having to deal with the UK. And what they did, and it's kind of a testament to their forward thinking anyway, because if you have a huge company that's kind of, you know, quite archaic in the way that they deal with things, it was so difficult for them to then turn around and deal with this crisis and all of the digitalization of their comms. These guys were already quite forward thinking anyway, not just in terms of the medium, but in the way that they communicate with people. And the difference that PPG have with in terms of comms compared to other companies is that they are very they listen. They don't just speak. Everything is a two-way conversation. It is absolutely on one level. And they create forums for their staff to speak to each other, not just within their own countries, but across different countries. And you have people doing communications in the head office in Switzerland and various different, and then you have people right down on, you know, on the factory floors and doing various different types of jobs. So what they did was they created a forum where everyone was seen as equal and everyone's voices were as equal, and they could create the conversation between each other. So it wasn't just, you know, the company speaking to the staff, it was the staff speaking to each other and them giving each other tips and creating that camaraderie, not just within a city or a country, but right across a region. And some of the stories that came out of it was just, you know, unreal, where people were showing just that human compassion across borders, across cultures. Another one that really stood out was the guys at John Lewis, and they've done the exact same thing, and they're renowned for being very good to their staff anyway. They call them partners, everyone has shares, and apparently it's a great place to work, and they're kind of the gold standard of comms anyway. And what they did was, obviously they've got John Lewis stores, and then they've got the Waitrose stores, and the John Lewis stores were obviously shutting down, and then Waitrose, the way that they described it was like it being Christmas but not being ready for Christmas. So they were asking people in the John Lewis stores, do you want to come and work at Waitrose? And because they wanted to keep their staff, they wanted to keep that community whole. So they were obviously trying to bring people in from John Lewis to work in the Waitrose stores, because they didn't want to have to deal with bringing in other people that would then water down the culture that they have. And I feel like some of the questions here as well that I've seen, I think there was something from John, and it was about communicating with member-based organisation and finding it difficult to get response and feedback. I think that sometimes it's best to have the people that you're trying to communicate with come up with their own questions, maybe to even ask each other and to ask of you, so that you're able to then draw insight from the conversations, as opposed to trying to draw insight from a question that you've posed, because maybe that's not the right question. Maybe you won't get an insightful answer because you've not asked the right question. Ask them to be asking each other questions, and you can draw insight from that conversation, which is far more valuable.
Fabulous, thank you. Bavisha, would you tell us your tips from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, they're quite similar to Laura's. A lot of what I do is written communication, but I suppose more importantly for fundraising in particular, it's really understanding people's motivation, and they're all completely different and they're unique. So it's always about establishing a real connection. Communication for us certainly aren't one way. We're not ever purporting to be a voice of authority in what we do. You can really be surprised by the elements of your story that people might pick up on and what they might find important. So for many of our funders, the opera is by the by, and actually it's about the impact that we make on our local communities and our local economy. For others, they really want to know, what 5-star shows and what great opera stars we're working with, and it's just about tailoring that, and also keeping it simple. In this particular environment now, where lots of theatre companies like the National are putting their work online for free, we're doing the same with Opera Vision. We've got the Ring Cycle, it's like a 16-hour long opera on for free. We're able to open up our content in a way that we haven't been before, and that does actually now mean that we need to reevaluate what it means for us to create new work. It does come at a cost, and is that something we talk about now or we talk about later? It's really about what's appropriate to talk about at the right time, and fitting with each person's motivations, because one of the things we always say, it's not about us, it's about them. And as fundraisers, often it's about bringing the cause or the beneficiaries of a project together with the people that are able to help fund that project. So us in between, we almost need to be imperceptible in what we're doing. It's almost a seamless connection between the really important stuff that's going on out on the ground, those projects that wouldn't happen otherwise without the support and the people who are supporting that. And often for the people that support it, they want to be really directly involved, and for some that they don't, and that's fine. And I think really about measuring and being quite granular in the way that we try to understand who we're bringing together and why we're bringing people and messages and stories together in a certain way. And that might mean doing it 10 different ways, but that might be the most effective way to do it.
Great, thank you. Before we get Georgina and Eleanor's thoughts, we've got time for a few more questions if you want to drop them into the chat box. Georgina, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I sort of went over my tips before, so I'll just sort of build on that. And I love Bavisha's point about reassessing what's important now and thinking about, that whole communication channel and what you're actually saying to people, because I think that's really important, because people still like to be communicated with, but they don't want that fatigue, as we talked about at the beginning. And also in line with that fatigue, so I know that we had a lot of questions about Zoom fatigue, and one of the things is it's very understandable where we say to children all the time, you can only have, or I do, only have 30 minutes of screen time on your iPad, or you can only have 30 minutes of screen time on YouTube. Come away from the screen and have a break. There was a reason why we said that, and it was so that they didn't get screen fatigue. It didn't impact on their performance. And as we've gone into lockdown, we seem to have forgotten all those rules. And so it also applies to us as adults, right? And I think it is important that you do have that buffer time. So we're encouraged at work to have much shorter meetings, and we have really sort of moved to that. We have shorter, snappier meetings, and we will, hopefully, people will put in a buffer. So if you book a meeting, for instance, from 11:15 to 11:45, then it gives you that sort of buffer of 15 minutes to then kick off your next meeting at 12. But it's important that we remember as adults to step away from the screen, and we should be doing that in the office place anyway when we're sitting at the computer working. So I think it's just having that discipline to do that. Also, in terms of George's point about communication being two-way, I think that's really important, because people don't want to hear lectures the whole time. And we had instilled a process actually before we went into lockdown. We've been doing it for a while now, where we've had these things called town halls, where we've had key messages being presented to us as employees, different people speaking. And we found very early on, when we opened the floor to people and said, any questions, everyone sat in silence, right? No one wanted to put their hand up or talk into the mic. So we introduced Slido some time ago, which is an online app where you log in your conference and people then can put comments and questions on Slido. So then you have someone helping facilitate your meeting, and a bit like this with chat. So if it's a big organizational activity and you don't have a chat feature, then having something like Slido has that interaction. And we've found that as we moved into this, really on everything was digitalized, we've still continued with that process. So our chief operating officer will give us town halls every sort of fortnight, and they're brilliant. And we raise our questions on Slido, and she's pretty good about addressing some of the things, maybe not others on the spot, but the fact is she is addressing them or trying to address them in some sort of way. So it's about sort of being interactive, and I think that is important to keep people engaged. Oh, actually, one other thing, sorry. You'll get really sick of hearing from me. The other thing, and I'm sure, I know that actually some of my team members have logged on to this, but I do feel a little bit sorry for them, having me as their line manager. But I sort of feel that it's important you shake it up, because we sit in our office, sit at our desk, looking at our screen, talking, and that can get a bit stale, and we get a bit stale. So I think you need to shake up how you're doing your meetings. And so as a result, like I'm actually standing, I'm not sitting, because if I stand, I'm more present. I'm not going to get distracted as easily. And I find that then I'm also more energized if I'm standing. The other thing we do is we have outside meetings. So we will take our mobile phones, we'll all log into Teams, and we do walking meetings. So we walk and talk. Now I'm really unfit, so I probably walk, talk, and puff. They walk and talk. But it means we're getting out of our just sedentary lifestyle, and that actually I think works really well, because it reinvigorates you a bit as well.
I love that, Georgina. Good old kinesthetic thinking for meetings. Eleanor, what about your tips?
Thank you. Yeah, to build on Georgina's point about using other things, like we have designed these amazing communication tools, and then we just use like the most limited parts of them. So things I've been doing with some of my clients is like we just change our background to a fun thing, like we're both in the Bahamas, or we're both in space, but we're in a place together that's a bit more enjoyable. There's also loads of things you can use, like if you don't have access to Slido, you could use something like Google Forms, or you could use a spreadsheet, and that's anonymous. There's Jamboard, Miro. Obviously you can use YouTube, Spotify, any social media, and just engage that in part of the meeting. So it might be that you're going to contribute a song to a shared playlist or something as like a fun activity to do together. We've got all these amazing tools. Just because we've not used them for work before doesn't mean that we can't right now. So yeah, anything like that I think is always really good fun. And it is, as to Georgina's point, sorry, it's about interaction and keeping people engaged in something, and often that's through multimedia sources. My three core tips though, the first one is always, these are very much about if you're going into a virtual meeting. That's what I kind of thought, like here are some tips for those. The first one is always know why you are there. So what is the reason for you being in that meeting? Essentially what is the point? So many of us have had that this meeting could have been an email situation, and we're probably going to feel that more, and some more resentment around that when we are having more virtual meetings that actually don't really make any sense, like why are we having this? So setting some sort of intention or purpose for actually going into the meeting, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to get out of it, will really help you pay attention, and will help you fulfill on that and feel like it's a productive use of your time. I've put in here, this is just a generally good communication point is listen more than you talk. So just because I think in virtual situations we assume that we all need to be more chatty so that people know we're paying attention, but actually you can get some of the most powerful results if you listen. And you can understand what's going on, you can understand the relationships between people more, you can get more information. So listening more than you're talking, because when you do talk, then it's going to be really well informed, rather than kind of rushing in and going, oh, blah, 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 here's the thing that I just thought of that I haven't been paying attention to anything. And also I've got 2A, when you do talk, don't apologise. The likelihood is you are going to interrupt somebody on Zoom. And if everyone's going, no, you go, sorry, no, you go, we'll never get anywhere. So just don't worry about it. Just plough on through. I think that's great. And then thirdly, I think Georgina said this before about attentiveness. My uncle gets, if we ever have dinner together, if I even check my phone, he refuses to talk to me. And I kind of, it's really extreme, but we're so used to just being like doing two things at once, always just checking a screen and just being attentive. You don't have to be attentive the whole time. If you know you're getting tired, like say, I'm just going to take a 5-minute break. But when you're in that conversation with someone, I think it is a mark of respect to be attentive to them. So wherever you can, try and be attentive. And if for any reason, for example, I have clients with anxiety disorders or ADHD or neurodiversity, if you know that's going to be an issue for you, just tell people. Tell them that you're going to struggle and say, this is the length of time that I can concentrate for. Or if I'm doing this, it's not because I don't care. I think attentiveness is a really great gift you can give to other people, but you need to be conscious of how much of it you can actually give at one time.
Amazing, thank you. It sounds a lot like what all of you are saying collectively, is that, you know, the same basic professionalism rules apply. We just need to evolve them and be mindful of how they work in the new normal. I'm just going to come back to the chat a little bit because there's some brilliant comments coming in. So there's one I spotted which was quite good, which was, who's waves bye-bye on Zoom meetings? You don't do that in a normal meeting. Where does that come from? But we're all doing it. So what else have we got? Someone's giving a shout out to Giggleswick School for just absolutely brilliant virtual school from the off. So that's lovely. Yeah, homeschooling has been mixed where I am. So yeah, someone else is, Christine's changing her background every time and have a bit of a competition with colleagues and friends to guess where she is. Eleanor, you've got a call out to do a TED talk. So, you know, get working on that, please. Sophie's asked. Thank you for that comment, because, you know, it's great to know that we're actually adding value to you people listening. So thank you. Oh, is that you, Christine? Hello. So Sophie's asked, can you all post your top tips either in the chat here or a follow-up email? Sophie, I think that's kind of might be creating a bit more work for everybody. But this session, you know, you guys, that's the request. If you're happy to put it together in a document and send it over, we can certainly circulate it. But this session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. So you can always go back and revisit it. And if you type up notes, if you want to circulate them, that'd be super. I'm
gonna say that I took one of Laura's points and was prepared, and I've written a blog post about this, so I'll post that there, you see.
Yes, lovely. Yeah, and there's a few people seconding that. So yeah, your tips are hitting the mark. So thank you, panelists. Erica has a rule with their partner when they go out for a meal or drink, don't use phones, and yes, absolutely necessary. It's just basic respect, isn't it? Being present. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Could I just add something to your point about the professionalism and the respect and things? I think this is a really interesting time that is showing to us perhaps how underdeveloped or unevolved our communication skills were before. And we're actually finding now that, oh, people aren't paying attention to me, or I'm finding it really hard to listen, or I'm finding it really hard to be attentive. And that for me suggests that we've moved from a time when actually we could kind of get away with not really paying attention in meetings. We could kind of get away with, you know, just sending off an email that we didn't think twice about. Whereas now every single thing has to be so well considered, because that's the only way that we're getting that experience of human interaction, that this is a great time to practice communication skills and to learn how to communicate better, because one, you're forced to, but two, it's actually this is gonna embed into whatever comes next, and we are gonna expect a higher level of communication skills from everyone, which includes things like emotional intelligence and reading body language, reading facial language. So this is a great time for anyone who wants to be learning more about that to kind of go and investigate it and start to practice it.
I know I've had this conversation with lots of people actually in my coaching sessions, as well as within my friends and colleagues. But how much do you struggle to read body language when there's a screen in the way and we haven't got that feedback? Has anyone struggled with that and got a tip about how we can still have that connection?
Yeah, sorry, Laura. No, I'm not apologising. I'm going to plough straight through.
Own it.
Yeah, we did a pitch this week, and it was the worst pitch I've ever. Well, I mean, it was fine, but just not being in the room with people. They were sat on a table, 4 people, and they were all distanced in this huge room. So they were sort of like dotted around this room, and they were like at the other end of this huge room, and we were obviously on the wall, and I couldn't see. So they're in a tiny little square like this anyway, and I've got my presentation on my screen, and then I can see me and my staff, and then there's 4 of them dotted about a room, and I'm just like, I have no idea what's going on these people's faces. Did they like it? Who knows? And it's really difficult for me to gauge what the hell even happened in that pitch. I have no idea if we're going to win that work. I don't have a clue. If I had gone in and I had built that rapport with those guys, I'd shaken their hands, I'd seen the white of their eyes, I would know how that had turned out. So for me, it was about I got so sort of annoyed about the situation that I wasn't able to gauge things the way that I normally do. Is I had to ring them up afterwards and be like, was that all right? Like, what was your actual feedback? And obviously, because they're all sat in a room together and they know how they felt, and they were obviously like, nodding at each other, and it seemed fine to them. I just didn't have a clue, so I had to ring them and be like, just have like a follow-up call and be like, how did it go? Did you have any more questions? Because they didn't have any questions, and that was even worse. Because you just like clearly weren't even listening, but they were, and it was fine as it turns out. So yeah, it was a matter of actually going back to old school and actually ringing them up and being, the person that we had the contact with, and being like, how did it go? How did it feel internally? It was like the day afterwards, so she had some time to gather all of her thoughts, and she was like, yeah, it was great. So that's my tip, is to maybe follow up a really important meeting with a phone call with that particular person that you have the contact with.
Cool, thank you. Does maybe 1 or 2 more of you want to comment on that, and then we'll wrap it up?
I was going to say that sometimes, again, I talk about my students because I think they were quite an interesting example of just like no response. Even in the classroom, no response. Something I have found that I'm not getting the energetic feedback, and that makes it more draining for me. So someone on here before who was an actor said that Zoom is more of a performance, and not really being able to read body language. I think you almost have to be a bit overconfident and be like, do you know what? I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to assume that you love this, and I'm going to act and perform as if you do. Interestingly, I watched Amy Cuddy's TED Talk last night about the power poses, and it kind of reminds me of that just because you can't see the rest of me doesn't mean that I can't be embodying some of that power and that performance that you will pick up on, but more importantly, I will pick up on. So I think there's a bit of, to the acting point, you kind of just have to assume that they're going to love it. But that's what I do with my students. I'm sure they'll love it, even if they seem really bored, because that way, that enthusiasm actually passes on to them. And that's maybe something we're not used to doing at work, particularly if we are femme presenting is what we're maybe not used to, just being like, here I am. So I think that body language is actually, maybe it's about ours and us thinking about our body language first so that other people pick up on it.
We're back to imposter syndrome, aren't we? And, you know, back to basics and doing what you can do to make yourself be the best version of yourself, and hopefully people will respond to that. So, for example, I feel a bit of a twat wearing bright red lipstick, you know, sitting here on my own, but it's my armor. It's how I can sit in front of a sea of faces and facilitate this lovely discussion. Georgina, did you want to close the show with a comment there?
I did, except I'm conscious that Laura was going to talk before, so I'm
sorry,
happy,
Laura.
Laura, if you want to add something, and then do you want to go? Or?
No, all I was going to say was I totally agree with what Eleanor's been saying, but I think also when I'm on a group chat, probably more with friends, I've got some friends who are very quiet and wouldn't just talk over. So I find I almost enter a bit of a facilitator mode and kind of I'm watching people just to see the little cues and then ask them a question. But just wherever possible, if it's a one-to-one conversation, I would always much rather be on the phone than on Zoom. I just find it a much more natural process. That's all I was going to say.
Thank you. Georgina?
All right, so I'm going to give an example. So building on Georgia's point where she had this presentation, I really didn't know how it went. In fact, for me, I've got the opposite scenario, because what Georgia described is what life was like for me before coming in to lockdown, in that I'm in the offices based in Leeds, and as you can tell from my accent, I'm not a Yorkshireman, married one, but not Yorkshire. And what I found when I came to the UK is I actually found that there is a real north-south divide. And I've found that my colleagues in London, and not just where I work now, but on the whole, colleagues in London have been almost condescending, slightly belittling of my colleagues in the north. And we found quite often in conference calls where the people in London might all be in a room together, and then we would be dialing in from Leeds, but they would have us on a conference call so we couldn't see them. Now, we all had our screens, we all had the capability to do video calling, but they weren't interested in putting their video screen on to show themselves to us. And so we had this scenario where we often could not gauge what was going on, and there was almost a bit of a clash between the two cultures. And certainly I felt that there wasn't an equal respect on both levels. Also, a little bit the same with working with my colleagues in Asia, in that they will all be sitting in a room in Asia. They will have their video screen on, but they'll all have the senior manager sitting at the top of the table, and no one will talk, and they'll all look to their senior manager to answer, whereas we're wanting the people who do the job to do the answering. So what I've found is that going into lockdown, with everyone having to look at a screen on their own, everyone having that same scenario, we all are in a situation. Some people might have better IT than others. Some people have better Wi-Fi than others. But we're all equalized because we're all sitting there looking at a screen, and suddenly you don't have the little snide comments or the little side looks going on or the side conversations. And so you're much more exposed, and we found that people are much more exposed, and suddenly the level of engagement that I've seen with the colleagues in London has gone up exponentially as they've gotten more used to working in this way. So I actually have found an opposite effect. I found it real positives coming out of this, and I really hope that when we come out of lockdown, the lessons that we've learned from this will continue when we go back into the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a sec, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sarah just to talk about some upcoming events we have. But we will get this event. Does everybody follow Lean in Leeds on LinkedIn? We have Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, but LinkedIn's probably the most widely used platform that we use. I'll get this event up there and the recording, but we'll also get the resources in there as well. So Eleanor, I know you posted a link to your your blog there. We'll get all the tips collated there for you if you want to follow us there and have those to take forward with you. So I'm just going to say thank you to our amazing panelists. We've got Georgia, Eleanor, Bavisha, Laura and Georgina. So thank you so much. And I will hand over to Sarah.
Thanks, Claire. Did you say you had a slide or not?
I did, but it's just
okay.
wing it.
Yeah, okay, so it's just a very quick heads up for our next breakfast event. Sorry, is it breakfast event, Claire?
Yeah.
It's breakfast event. Our next breakfast event, which I think is going to be on the 10th of July, and we don't have a title for it yet, but just to say a little bit about what it's going to be about. As a steering group, we've sort of been reflecting recently on the shocking murder of George Floyd in the US and the sort of massive global reaction to that. And we've just been talking about what, as a group, we would like to kind of do in reaction to that. So we're having an event to basically start the conversation about what this means for us as a network, how we should respond, and how we can we can contribute to positive change as a network, but also how we can perhaps change how we do things as a network to make sure that all the voices that are part of our network are represented, and we elevate the voices that maybe aren't heard as much at the moment. So we think it's a really important conversation to have. Please do come along if you can. We'll be sending some more information out about it soon, but we want it to be a very interactive event. So if you want to participate and come and tell us about your experiences, that'd be really great. And if you have ideas about what you want to discuss as part of the event, just let us know on our Lean In Gmail address or through social media.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, that's 10th of July, Breakfast Club again. It's Friday morning, 8:30 till 10 again. Keep an eye on your emails we want contributions for that. So yeah, please get involved. We've also got an evening event coming up on the 19th of July, which is about resilience during this challenging time. What have we learned? And then we've got an online drink session on the 30th of July, which we hope you can join us for. So all that remains is for me to say thank you to everybody for joining us, and look after yourselves, take care, and we'll see you again soon. Everyone do the wave.
Bye.